After spending decades behind bars, Perry Lott is a free man.
Being birthed into a whole new life, out of the womb of captivity and bondage.
I'm a free man.
It is so ordered. It's this single line that makes everything final for Glynn Simmons.
I just knew that one day this was gonna come. I'm so grateful. Thank God.
A free man now with a cleared name.
I was exonerated on August 22nd, 2019. A lot of people think the ultimate goal is just getting exonerated and getting out of prison, getting your freedom back. It's a lot more than that.
In this is Lamar Johnson, who was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action in St. Louis, Missouri.
All right. Oh yeah. I'm on Circuit Court Division 17 is now in session.
Johnson's journey began in October 1994 when Marcus Boyd was shot to death on his front porch by two masked men. Prosecutors claimed it was over drug money. Johnson always insisted he was with his girlfriend miles away, except for a brief window when he sold drugs on a nearby corner. Despite this alibi and lack of physical evidence, Johnson was convicted and sentenced to life. For nearly 3 decades, Johnson maintained his innocence. But the state's case rested on a single eyewitness, James Elking, who later recanted, saying he was pressured by police. Another key witness, Phil Campbell, admitted guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence and also admitted Johnson wasn't involved. During his hearing, Judge David Mason addressed the court.
Well, I'm going to call the matter of Circuit Attorney, 22nd Judicial Circuit of Missouri, ex-rel Lamar Johnson. This is cause 2222-CC09375. Let the record reflect that counsel for both the movement and relator are present before this court. Likewise, relator Lamar Johnson is present before the court. Also appearing pursuant to statute is counsel for the Office of the Attorney General.
And pointed out issues that needed to be addressed.
Due process rights of the defendant adequately protected through the course of the jury trial. And if they were protected, were there constitutional violations of a kind in nature that would cause the court to doubt or question the validity or lose confidence of the actual legitimacy of the verdict?
He reviewed every detail, going through pages of testimony and evidence.
As you know, I spent quite a bit of time on this. And these cases are not easy, and they shouldn't be. They should not be cavalierly ruled upon. Some people said, why don't you rule from the bench? I said, you can't treat a case like this that way. Well, why don't you make one ruling and write an opinion later? I said, well, to be perfectly frank with you, until I have plowed through the file, I really couldn't be 100% certain of what my decision would be.
The investigation uncovered a problem with the jailhouse informant testimony, which played a critical role in Lamar's conviction.
Very strong questioning of the witnesses to see if there was any shaking in the reliability of what the witnesses had to say. Inconsistencies, things did not fit with the objective facts of the case. Were there consistencies from the day moving forward? Those things make a big difference. Because in these cases, you're going to tell somebody, look, you got to stay in, or you're going to tell somebody you're going to get out.
2 men, James Howard and Phil Campbell, signed affidavits admitting to the crime and clearing Johnson. Howard testified he and Campbell decided to rob Boyd, and Johnson wasn't involved. Their confessions, combined with Elking's recantation, dismantled the state's case. And after the review of all of this, the judge said this.
After reviewing both the underlying trial as well as the entirety of the hearing, and you can read all the analysis, but for the reasons stated above, it is hereby ordered that the motion of the Circuit Attorney of the 22nd Judicial Circuit filed herein for the benefit of Lamar Johnson is granted.
And Lamar's reaction?
The conviction of Lamar Johnson in State v. Lamar Johnson, cause 22-941-37068, is hereby set aside and held for naught. Bailiff, this hearing is adjourned.
All right.
Lamar, once a convicted felon, was now a free man. But what happens when the fight for justice takes even longer than that? This is Daniel Saldana, who was charged with 6 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of shooting at an occupied vehicle in Baldwin Park, California.
LA County District Attorney George Gascon just exonerated a man his office says was wrongly convicted trying to kill 6 people back in 1989.
This is an important day for Mr. Saldana and his family. And this is the day that we publicly announce that Mr. Saldana is an innocent man.
Saldana's nightmare began in the spring of 1989. 6 high school students were leaving a football game in Baldwin Park when their car was fired upon. Prosecutors said Saldana, then just 22, and 2 others mistook them for rival gang members and opened fire. 2 teens were wounded, but none were killed. Saldana, a construction worker with no gang ties, was convicted in 1990 and sentenced to 45 years to life in prison. For over 3 decades, Saldana maintained his innocence. He insisted he was nowhere near the shooting that night, but his pleas fell on deaf ears until 2017.
One of the other defendants told a parole board in 2017 that Saldana was never at that shooting. The parole board forwarded the information to the DA's office in February of this year, and prosecutors worked to exonerate Saldana. Gascon puts the blame for this error on former members of the parole board for not acting on the information back in 2017 and adds there may be more suspects out there.
For 5 long years, that critical exonerating evidence sat buried in bureaucracy. It wasn't until February 2023 that the California Board of Parole Hearings finally forwarded the confession to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Conviction Integrity Unit. Their investigation quickly determined what Saldana had said all along. He was innocent. On May 25, 2023, District Attorney George Gascon stood before the cameras and made it official.
We have determined that Daniel Saldana is innocent of the crimes that he was convicted of and spent 33 years in prison for.
District Attorney Gascon's apology was loud as well.
I know that this won't bring you back the decades you endure in prison, and I hope that our apology...
As Saldana stood before the press, free at last, he struggled to find words. This was his reaction.
I just knew that one day this was gonna come. I'm just so grateful.
But justice sometimes takes even longer. What happens when the fight for freedom spans not just decades, but generations? In our next case, a 40-year battle for truth reaches its dramatic conclusion. This is Kwame Ajamu, who was charged with first-degree murder, robbery, and aggravated assault in Cleveland, Ohio.
The court then does grant Mr. Ajamu's motion or petition for post-conviction relief. Also grants Mr. Ajamu's motion for leave to file a delayed motion for new trial, although really that's going to become moot.
A May 1975, 17-year-old Kwame Ajamu, then Ronnie Bridgman, his brother Wiley Bridgman, and their friend Ricky Jackson were arrested for the murder of Harold Franks. The main evidence against them? Coerced testimony from a 12-year-old boy named Edward Vernon. All 3 young men were convicted and sentenced to death. 2 years later, their sentences were commuted to life. For 39 years, Ajamu maintained his innocence. His legal team never gave up hope. Finally, in 2011, a local newspaper investigation cast doubt on the case. Then, everything changed. Edward Vernon, now an adult, recanted. He admitted Cleveland police had coerced him to testify falsely. Kwame Ajamu had much to say about the law enforcement.
Declined this battle 40 years. It is my hope that going forward, we don't have to wait 40 years for the next Kwame Ajamu, Wiley Bridgman, Ricky Jackson.
But the truth alone wasn't enough. It took relentless work by Friedman, Gilbert, plus Gerhard Stein attorneys. And finally, in 2014, Kwame Ajamu was exonerated.
The state's motion to dismiss the case, it is dismissed against Mr. Ajamu.
Kwame was so grateful he did this.
And the original conviction is, in fact, vacated. And I know it's been a long time, Mr. Ajamu, and I am so happy to be involved in the...
And then this.
First of all, I'd like to say, praise God. God is good all the time. I want to thank you for showing up, ma'am, in your courtroom today and being, as you said, a privilege and honor to have at this momentous occasion.
In 2014, Ajamu and Wiley Bridgman were declared wrongfully imprisoned, and the state of Ohio settled for over $4.3 million. But Ajamu wanted more than compensation. He wanted accountability. So in July 2015, Ajamu and Bridgman filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Cleveland and the officers who fabricated evidence and coerced Vernon's testimony. After years of legal battles, the city finally settled an $18 million agreement for the three men, the largest wrongful imprisonment settlement in Ohio history. But what if exoneration comes too late? In the next case, we witness a man finally freed after nearly 5 decades, but facing a final race against time. This is Dontae Sharpe, who was charged with murder in Greenville, North Carolina.
People really don't know how going to prison for something you didn't do, a crime you didn't commit, especially for a long, long time.
In April 1994, 19-year-old Dontae Sharpe was arrested for the shooting death of George Radcliffe, a 33-year-old white man who had come into Sharpe's predominantly black neighborhood. There was no forensic evidence tying Sharpe to the crime. His conviction rested on the testimony of a 13-year-old eyewitness who had recently been in a psychiatric hospital, a fact that was never shared with Sharpe's defense. Sharpe was sentenced to life in prison, and for 26 years he maintained his innocence, refusing all plea deals that required admitting guilt. His legal team fought tirelessly to expose the flaws in the prosecution's case, including suppressed forensic details and a witness who later recanted her testimony, admitting she had fabricated her account under pressure and for a reward. And the justice system had let race and flawed evidence determine Sharpe's fate, creating a fight for truth that stretched over a quarter century. But everything was about to change.
Everything I wrote and everything I said was a lie. What did you say? That Mr. Sharpe shot Mr. Radcliffe.
The courtroom was silent for a moment that would shake the foundation of the case.
It's physically impossible that a man could stand in front of another man, shot by a gun, and have the bullet go through the left arm, graze the heart, and end up in the right arm. It's physically impossible.
The judge ordered a new trial and dismissed all charges against Sharpe.
In the exercise of this discretion, the court finds that justice requires a new trial.
Outside the courthouse, Sharpe shared a powerful statement.
I'm innocent, man. I did not do this. I didn't kill this man.
But the battle wasn't over. Despite being free, Sharpe's felony conviction still haunted him. Without a pardon, he faced barriers to employment, housing, and compensation. The governor of North Carolina had the power to clear his record, but had yet to act.
When I first got out, I couldn't get a job. The felony that was stopping me from getting a job, the felony stopping me from getting an apartment. Seemed like the felony was controlling my life, and the only way I can get the felony on my record is get pardoned. I haven't been pardoned. Governor Roy Cooper, for some reason, hasn't pardoned me. If I were to get a pardon, it would make everything a lot easier.
Sharpe voiced his frustration openly.
Turkey for Thanksgiving, so it's a tradition for the governor and the president to pardon the turkeys for Thanksgiving. That's a holiday that we celebrate here in America. It's all right to have traditions, but pardoning a human being is way more important than pardoning an animal.
But Sharpe didn't give up. With the support of his family and advocacy groups, he pushed for justice beyond prison walls.
I'm just here to put Mr. Cooper, this whole system, North Carolina, on notice that I'm gonna keep right on talking, because there's more guys left that I left in there behind me that's innocent. They buried this man alive. You're looking at a miracle. There was never an intention for him to be standing here today.
Then finally, on November 12th, 2021, Dontae Sharpe got his pardon. This is how he reacted to getting out.
This is a case they're going to be teaching in law school 100 years from now. What could Dontae have become?
It was a travesty of justice. It took 26 years to make it partially right.
I was exonerated on August 22nd, 2019.
Sharpe knows what it's like to be haunted by the mistakes of others, but what happens when the system makes a mistake that almost ruins a promising life? This is Greg Kelly, who was charged with 2 counts of super aggravated sexual assault of a child in Cedar Park, Texas.
Full of terrifying experiences for me.
but it was also a place where I found God.
Greg was a high school football star, living a normal life until 2013, when allegations from a local daycare turned his world upside down. He was accused of two young boys in the home of the daycare operator. On July 2, 2014, Greg Kelly was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison, despite major flaws in the case, such as the child never definitively identifying him and the lead detective admitting to leading questions. Kelly was found guilty. The charge related to one child was dismissed, but the other carried the full weight of the conviction. Kelly refused to accept a plea deal that would have kept him out of prison, but required admitting guilt. Years later, new evidence revealed another suspect, Jonathan McCarty, the son of the daycare operator and a former roommate of Kelly's. McCarty was in prison on separate drug charges at the time. Something was about to turn the case upside down.
3 years into his sentence, he was released on bond following new evidence in the case. Evidence which would ultimately overturn his original guilty verdict.
Greg's new legal team exposed investigative failures and questionable tactics, including an inadequate defense and a flawed police investigation. In August 2017, after serving more than 3 years in prison, Kelly was released on bond. Then in November 2019, Greg Kelly faced the Williamson County judge for his make-or-break moment.
I declare you innocent and that you are fully exonerated.
And Greg Kelly's reaction.
Now I'm feeling a lot of awesome things in my life, but ultimately I just look forward to being free.
Now, freed and exonerated, Greg looks forward to making the most of it.
Now, I found a new sense of freedom. I think it's fair to say that I can appreciate freedom more than anybody right now.
One of those ways is to hold people accountable.
People like that having a badge is completely terrifying, and ultimately I would be scared to death to live in Cedar Park knowing that a detective can literally point you out, label you out, and solely seek out an investigation no matter if there's another.
Kelly got his freedom after nearly 4 years in prison, but in the next case, the fight for justice takes a darker, more complicated turn. This is Perry Lott, who was charged with first-degree rape and second-degree burglary in Ada, Oklahoma.
After spending decades behind bars, Perry Lott is a free man.
I'm being birthed into a whole new life. Out of the womb of captivity and bondage.
Back in November 1987, a woman in Ada received several anonymous bomb threats before an attacker forced his way into her home, robbed her, and sexually assaulted her. The survivor described her assailant as a black man with a gold tooth, clean-shaven, wearing a cap and jacket. On November 4th, 1987, after a police lineup where Lott was the only person without gold foil on his teeth, the survivor identified him as the attacker. Despite inconsistencies, like Lott having a mustache and an alibi confirmed by his fiancée, he was convicted and sentenced to 100 years in prison. The evidence telling a very different story was buried for decades. Instead, Lott was convicted based on this.
In 1987, an Ada woman said her had a gold tooth, and since Lott was the only man in the lineup who had one, she picked him.
In 2014, DNA testing on the original rape kit excluded Perry Lott as the source. Yet despite this conclusive scientific proof of innocence, the former district attorney opposed vacating the conviction. Instead, 5 years later, Lott accepted a sentence modification that freed him immediately, but left the conviction intact. Something was about to shift in the pursuit of justice.
The discovery of misconduct by government officials who perhaps suppressed evidence that they were supposed to turn over.
In 2023, the newly elected district attorney reviewed the case, acknowledged the exonerating DNA evidence, and moved to vacate Lott's conviction. This decision was a turning point after 35 years spent fighting to clear his name.
Being birthed into a whole new life, out of the womb of captivity and bondage.
And finally, on 10th October 2023, with the help of the Innocence Project, Perry Lott cleared his name. This is what he thought of it.
After spending decades behind bars, Perry Lott is a free man.
I'm being birthed into a whole new life.
Despite spending decades behind bars, Perry finally made it out. What happens when the difference between freedom and captivity is just one tiny bit of evidence that was deliberately withheld? This is Arvel Marshall, a Brooklyn man who faced life behind bars for a 2008 murder. He always insisted he didn't commit. Now 52, Marshall's battle to clear his name stretched over 16 long years, and the turning point was a piece of evidence that everyone missed.
Arvel Marshall has been proclaiming his innocence to anyone who would listen since 2008. You're about to see the key evidence, the surveillance video that finally led to his exoneration.
Let's start with the core facts. On July 15, 2008, Mustafa Umaria was shot and killed in Brooklyn, New York. Marshall, who was 36 at the time, became the prime suspect. In 2009, he was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. But all along, there was a critical piece of evidence no one bothered to view. The case started falling apart when Brooklyn's Conviction Review Unit took a closer look. Their investigation revealed that everyone involved, defense, prosecution, police, even the court, made a crucial error. They never examined the full surveillance video from the crime scene. Instead, they relied on a few still images and assumed the actual footage had no evidentiary value. The truth was, no one ever truly watched it. What that video showed changed everything.
Arvel Marshall waited 16 years to see dark and grainy surveillance footage from a Brooklyn street corner.
And the footage depicted two young men in the area around the time of the shooting, one matching the eyewitness description of the shooter, even pulling an object from his waistband. According to defense investigators, a tipster claimed the real shooter was a teenager. That didn't fit Marshall, who was nearly twice that age. But the real bombshell? The prosecutor claimed technical difficulties prevented showing the video in court, repeatedly failing to play it during the trial. Instead, they presented stills and brushed off the rest as irrelevant, without ever viewing the full footage. That error would cost Marshall 16 years of his life. It wasn't just the video. The Conviction Review Unit also found Marshall's original defense attorney did almost nothing to prepare for trial. With few resources and little effort, the case went forward on incomplete evidence. Everyone assumed the partial footage told the whole story, but Marshall refused to give up.
Marshall kept demanding to see the evidence for himself.
He filed motion after motion demanding access to the full video evidence. For years, his requests went ignored or dismissed. It wasn't until Brooklyn's Conviction Review Unit took over that anyone finally bothered to review the actual footage. When they did, the truth became impossible to ignore.
Despite the fact that the three eyewitnesses all described the shooter as a kid between the ages of 16 and 21 years old, detectives arrested Mr. Marshall and charged him with the murder. Mr. Marshall was 36 years old at the time. The inescapable conclusion is that the video depicts the actual shooter.
On August 9, 2024, Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez personally moved to vacate Marshall's conviction. That same day, a judge tossed out the case, and Marshall walked free after 16 years. Standing outside the courthouse, Marshall didn't hold back.
They knew I was innocent. They knew it would have proved my innocence, so they tried to keep it under.
And his reaction, touching.
Friday, Marshall was exonerated.
I'm happy it's over, you know, and I'm kind of still depressed I had to go through all this, knowing I was innocent, and I've been telling them.
But the next case is even wilder. What happens when the evidence was never there to begin with? This is Glynn Simmons, who was convicted of murder and armed robbery in Edmond, Oklahoma. He spent 48 years, 1 month, and 18 days behind bars, making him the longest-serving exonerated person in U.S. history.
And a nearly 50-year fight for justice is over. Citing a lack of evidence and other factors, an Oklahoma County judge has ruled Glynn Simmons will not face a new murder trial.
Let's start with the hard truth. On December 30th, 1974, a liquor store in Edmond was robbed. 2 women were shot, one killed, one seriously injured. Simmons and another man, Don Roberts, were arrested soon after in Louisiana, miles from the crime scene. At trial, Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death. But there were problems with the case from the very beginning. Over the years, Simmons maintained his innocence. He insisted that, at the time of the murder, he was in Louisiana, nowhere near Oklahoma. But the prosecution pressed forward with its case, built largely on eyewitness testimony from the surviving victim. That testimony would later come under serious scrutiny. The cracks in the case started to show.
Simmons was charged, even though the surviving woman didn't pick him out in that lineup.
Records revealed that key evidence, specifically a police report suggesting the eyewitness may have identified other suspects, was never turned over to the defense. This withheld information would have completely changed the course of the trial. After nearly 5 decades, a new district attorney finally took a closer look. She determined there was no longer any physical evidence linking Simmons to the crime. The surviving victim's identification was shaky at best. The original eyewitness testimony had been tainted by improper procedures and pressure from investigators. But Simmons and his legal team didn't stop there. They uncovered even more problems with the original investigation. The police lineup was improperly conducted, showing Simmons in a way that made him stand out from the others. Critical details about the crime scene didn't match the prosecution's theory. And most damning, new evidence showed that Simmons' alibi was solid all along. The legal team filed motion after motion, pushing for a new trial. In July 2023, a judge granted it. finally acknowledging that Simmons had been deprived of a fair trial nearly 50 years earlier. Still, the fight wasn't over. The district attorney ultimately decided not to retry the case. With no physical evidence, no reliable eyewitness, and credible proof of Simmons' innocence, there was nothing left to prosecute. But even then, the DA opposed granting Simmons a formal declaration of actual innocence. Finally, on December 19, 2023, an Oklahoma County judge issued a ruling by clear and convincing evidence. Simmons was actually innocent of the crime that had cost him nearly a half-century of his life. This was how he felt about it.
Validation and vindication is finally happened. It's a lesson in resilience and tenacity. You know, when you know you're free, when you know you're innocent.
But before that, he had made history, a negative one.
Glynn Simmons says he served 48 years, 5 months, and 13 days in prison. That makes him the longest-serving exonerated man in recorded U.S. history.
Despite his exoneration, Simmons faced enormous challenges. He was released with nothing. No compensation, no resources, and serious health issues. After more than 48 years behind bars, he discovered he had cancer. The state offered a maximum of $175,000 in compensation, a fraction of what he'd lost. Legal appeals for full compensation would take years to resolve, and Glynn Simmons and his lawyers know that the fight is not over.
I hope that we can make some policy changes to try and, if not eliminate, reduce what's happened to Glynn.
The numbers don't add up. So when we talk about, justice, you got to also consider race in the issue. There's a lot of guys left behind where I came from. Not fortunate to have the team that I had on my side. And they're still languishing in it.
But in the next courtroom, things get even more complicated. What happens when multiple witnesses change their stories decades later? This is Daniel Villegas, accused of killing 2 teens in El Paso, Texas, back in 1993 when he was just 16 years old.
All rise.
Please be seated. The record should reflect the attorneys for the state, the attorneys for the accused.
At that time, without an attorney or his parents present, Villegas says he was coerced by an El Paso detective into confessing to the murders. Despite recanting that confession hours later, it became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Villegas has been tried 3 separate times for this crime and has always maintained his innocence. His first trial in 1994 ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury. A 1995 retrial ended with a conviction for capital murder, and Villegas was sentenced to life in prison. After spending 18 years in prison, that conviction was thrown out in 2013 because of ineffective assistance of counsel. Villegas was released in January 2014 and remained out on bond while awaiting a 3rd trial. During that time, he fathered 2 children, and though the prosecution continued to insist on his guilt, there was still no DNA, no firearm, and no forensic evidence linking him to the shooting. Within moments, he would find out if he'd go home with his family or spend the rest of his life in prison. Now on trial for the 3rd time, many believed he had been wrongfully convicted. The last 25 years of his life, much of it behind bars, had all led to this single moment.
In the District Court of El Paso County, Texas, 409th Judicial District, the state of Texas versus Daniel Villegas, number 94-0D09328. Verdict Form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty.
For the first time in 25 years, Daniel Villegas was finally free, and he couldn't contain himself.